Hey everybody, welcome back once again to another Great Commission Alliance media channel Bible Byte. My name is Chris, and today I want to talk about greatness. Today it seems like everybody is obsessed over greatness. Every show, every sports channel, every podcast, it seems to constantly be on the debates of who's the GOAT, who's the greatest of all time. And it's such a subjective debate that you have. And but it's still the need and desire for us to be able to label who was the best of the best. Well, this isn't just an obsession that is going on in our society today, but this is something that even in Jesus' time, they were having the same arguments and the same debate. In fact, today we're going to look at one of those exact situations in which Jesus' very own disciples were arguing amongst themselves about who was the greatest, who would be the greatest. And so today we're going to look at that and look at how Jesus has used this as an opportunity to teach them about what true greatness means and what that really looks like. So we're going to look at that here today. So stay tuned. So we're going to look at today Mark chapter 9, verses 33 through 37. And let me just read that for us now. It says, "And they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, 'What were you discussing on the way?'" Now this is Jesus talking to his disciples. Verse 34, "But they kept silent, for on their way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down, he called the 12. And he said to them, 'If anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all.' And he took a child and he put him in the midst of them. And taking him in his arms, he said to them, 'Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me.'" So just to kind of give you a quick context of this, this verses that I just read is right after Jesus is traveling with his disciples. And in fact, right before this verse I read, it says they were passing through Galilee, and Jesus took that opportunity for the second time now to tell them that he was about to be handed over to the hands of men. He was going to be killed, and that in 3 days later he would rise again. And so it's on this same journey right after this that apparently this argument amongst the disciples comes up of who's the greatest. So at a time you would think when you're finding out that your leader and your Lord is about to be handed over and killed, and that he's going to rise again 3 days later, it seems the most important thing for them at that time was, which among us is the greatest? Which of us is the best of the best? And so the first three, I think, observations that I get as I read these verses is, number one, Jesus first asked them a question that he already knows the answer to. That's so important because we see that too, that God does the same to us. And a lot of times we'll kind of call that conviction, where it seems like God's pressing on us some type of sin or something that we've done wrong, and kind of just puts it on our heart, or he reveals it through his word or through somebody else sometimes. But how God just kind of brings that question up to the forefront. And we see the response of the disciples is kind of the same way sometimes we respond, is they kind of had their head down, and none of them could answer because they knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew that it was wrong of them to sit there and just argue about who was the best. And Jesus didn't use this opportunity to shame them or put them down, but he used it as a learning opportunity to then tell them what true greatness looks like. And so what do we see as we look at Jesus' answer to them? Well, what we see is something that's completely contrary to what the world's view of greatness is. He first tells them, he's like, anyone who wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. So every argument, every debate that we see today on who's the GOAT, who's the greatest of all time, usually comes down to the same kind of things. Like it comes down to how long they've played, or they were involved in whatever it was, and what their statistics were, and what ways that they led in, and and for instance, in sports, how many championships they may have won, and so on and so on. But it's all personal accomplishments, things that they did that put them over the rest, that made them first, that made them above everyone else. And here Jesus's answer to this, of really what greatness means in the kingdom of God, is the one that's going to be the least, the one that's going to be last, the one that doesn't put themselves at the top, puts themselves at the bottom, the one that serves others. That's another thing that's in contrary, is that, the way we look at people that are great or in high positions of leadership is those who have power, those who have authority. And here we see that Jesus is saying that, those things aren't to put yourself on top. We're supposed to use those opportunities and the influence that we have in this world to just lift other people up, to serve them, to push them up, and not ourselves. And then Jesus goes on, and he actually grabs a child and he brings the child in, and he says, "Whoever receives one child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me." So here Jesus is taking a child, and at that time, and the disciples that he was talking to would have understood, what Jesus was meaning by this, by grabbing a child. But a child at that point was considered a second-class citizen. They really had no authority, no power, basically had to answer to anyone that's above them. A child is somebody that would be, considered vulnerable, so and also somebody that really could not do anything for you, in return. And so Jesus is kind of using that to show us that, we're to serve others that aren't going to have any advantage for us, that are in vulnerable positions, that are in low positions in society and in life. And those are the ones that we're supposed to lift up and put before us, that we're not to lord over them. Jesus literally talks about, in the same chapter, in Mark chapter, I think it's actually in chapter 10, that he is talking later on now to James and John. And James and John now come to Jesus and say, "Hey, we have a question. Will you grant our request?" And Jesus is like, "What can I do for you?" And they basically go on to ask, "Hey, can one of us sit on your right and one of us on your left in your glory?" And Jesus goes on to say that, only I can't grant that request. Only the Father in heaven knows that. But then he also goes on to say this. He says, and again, he takes this as a situation to teach all the disciples once again what's really important, what greatness really is. And he says, "Those who are considered rulers of Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all." Right? And so again, here Jesus is saying that we don't use our position, we don't use our power, we don't use where we're at in our life as a platform to put other people down and bring us higher up. And unfortunately, that's the opposite of kind of what the world's view is. And he says instead, again, he tells us again, whoever wants to be great amongst you must be the servant. And so bottom line is, Jesus doesn't just tell us these things, but Jesus modeled this for us. If we look at the last verse, this is in Mark chapter 10, this is verse 45, it says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many." So ultimately, guys, as we're following the lead that Jesus did for us, if anybody was the GOAT, if anybody was the greatest of all time, Jesus Christ was it. Jesus Christ was God in the flesh on this earth. He had every right to be worshipped, to establish his kingdom, to put everybody down below him, to worship him and serve him, and however he wanted to do it. But no, Jesus came instead. He says he came instead to not glorify himself, but to put himself as a servant for everyone, because he knew ultimately that it was his. It was only through his sacrifice, through his death, that the penalty that laid on all of us of eternal separation from God, the penalty that we all faced, it was the only way that God could bring us back into unity with himself was through the death of his very own son. And so we are to model that. We are to follow Christ and follow in his ways, and remember to put God first in our life and then put others above ourselves. And so, guys, I hope this is encouraging for you. I hope this changed maybe the view of what we think is greatness and in this world. And guys, I appreciate you joining us, and I hope to see you again next time.